Chancy and the Grand Rascal by Sid Fleischman, 15, The Great Plains. They walked all the way to St. Louis. They arrived early in August, in the sunniest of spirits, and with a jangle of money in their pockets. Uncle Will had sold 2 clocks along the way, shingled a barn roof, and picked up a day's work here and there as a tramp printer. Passing from one river town to the next, Chancy had chopped stove wood and Indiana had bottomed chairs. She had also learned to write her name, scratching it 1,000 times between Cairo and St. Louis. With the extra money they had made, they treated themselves to steamboat tickets and traveled in style up the Missouri River to Kansas City. Indiana had woven a cage out of split cane and carried Calamity as grandly as a parrot. Pushing the wheelbarrow before them, they walked from the boat landing straight to the Kansas Pacific train depot. Chancy had never ridden a train before, neither had Indiana. Uncle Will bought tickets. While Uncle Will bought tickets, they gazed at the engine, belching smoke from its funnel and hissing steam like a great serpent. Indiana was hesitant about the journey ahead. "That thing don't look entirely friendly," she whispered. The bell began to clang. Uncle Will heaved the wheelbarrow into the baggage car and hustled Chancy and Indiana aboard. They settled themselves on hard wooden seats in the immigrant car. It was the cheapest fare, but they would arrive in Abilene late that afternoon, and that beat walking. From there they would have to make their way as best they could to Sundance. A pot-bellied stove stood on either end of the car, and spittoons were lined up along the aisle like a double row of brass buttons. It all seemed immensely grand to Chancy and Indiana. They found themselves in the jolly company of settlers, poor adventurers, land seekers, ex-soldiers, and entire families heading west to make new lives for themselves. The train was soon rattling out across the open prairie. Here and there a windmill stood like a sunflower on the horizon. Smoke came swirling back from the engine, and despite the heat, the passengers were forced to close their windows. They rushed on, mile after mile, hour after hour, with the hard wooden seats under them reverberating to the clickety-cut of the wheels. Chancy spent a good deal of time polishing his buckeye. The towns they passed grew smaller and smaller until there was nothing to be seen but a few weathered shacks and a water tower gleaming in the sun. They hurtled past a covered wagon train lumbering west. As the afternoon wore on, the horizon seemed to recede and the sky grew huge and overwhelming. Now and then the engine jerked to a stop as if to catch its fiery breath and took on wood. They got out to stretch their legs, but soon the train was on its way again. Indiana was sure her teeth would come rattling out like shelled corn before they reached Abilene. Abilene was only a few miles off when Chancy, gazing through the window, said, "Indians!" Gazing back and almost close enough to touch stood 3 braves mounted on ponies beside the iron rails. "Mercy!" Indiana whispered, slipping down in her seat. Civilization seemed suddenly far behind. Dust was blowing off the Great Plains when the Kansas Pacific, which didn't reach the Pacific but hoped to someday, set them down in the booming new cow town of Abilene. A steady lowing of cattle was carried on the wind. Texas longhorns, waiting to be shipped east to the stockyards, were grazing in huge herds on the surrounding prairie. Texas cowboys were lounging everywhere along the dust-blown Main Street. Chancy could hardly believe his eyes. Here were men in wide-brimmed hats and buckskin shirts, and guns hanging from their cartridge belts. Cowboys! The jingle-jangle of spurs chimed in the wind. Chancy felt set down at the edge of the world. Everywhere he looked stood men unlike any he'd ever seen. Long-haired scouts, horse soldiers with yellow stripes down their legs, mule skinners, and even an Indian or two with an eagle feather tucked in his hair. Indiana was agog. It was like an outdoor costume ball. Uncle Will himself was amazed. "How the place has grown," he said. "Last time I was in Kansas, you couldn't find Abilene if you were standing in the middle of it." He led them across the tracks to the drover's cottage, where he signed the register and they had supper. In a crowded dining room, cattle owners and cattle buyers bargained over the herds that were waiting on bed ground for miles around. And if the talk wasn't about the price of longhorns, it was about jayhawkers. "What in tarnation are jayhawkers?" said Chancy, who had been so busy looking and listening that he had hardly said a word since arriving in Abilene. "Outlaws," Uncle Will answered. "A ragtag and bobtail breed of men left over from the war. They roam around the countryside, plundering and shooting folks as if the war never ended. A bad lot. with rewards on their heads, most of them. The name that seemed on everyone's tongue was Seven Eyes Smith. He and his gang had tried to rustle a herd of cattle to the south, but the drovers had fought them off. When Uncle Will rose in the morning, he surprised Chancy by digging deep in his carpet bag and buckling on a gun belt. He had owned a six-shooter all along. By dogs, Chancy said. He had taken a fancy to the Great Plains already. He wouldn't mind growing up in a buckskin shirt and wearing spurs on his boots if Uncle Will decided to roost in Kansas. That would suit him fine. They went around to the livery stable, rented a buckboard, and loaded their possessions. They sat close together on the spring seat, with Calamity and Tolly and started out for Sundance, a few hours to the southwest. With Mirandy and little Jamie now so close, Indiana couldn't sit still. Stop your squirming, Chancy said finally. Can't! I've got the all-over fidgets. Do you reckon they'll remember us? Not likely. They were just young'uns when we left. I don't think Miss Russell would let them forget you, Uncle Will said. The wind had died away in the night, and there wasn't a scrap of cloud in the wide blue sky. The buckboard passed longhorns and cow camps by the mile. The prairie spreading outside Abilene had become a huge holding ground. Uncle Will shook his head at the wonder of it all. By the eternal, it looks like all Texas is camped right here in Kansas. Late in the morning, the buckboard crossed a creek, and suddenly Indiana gave a yelp. Look there! That man's fixing to drown a litter of kittens! Uncle Will pulled up the reins, and then he swung the buckboard along the shallow creek. The man was a short, squat cowboy with legs bent like barrel staves. He was about to lower a lumpy muling sack when Uncle Will pulled up. Howdy, he said, shoving back his hat. Would those be felines you've got there? No, sir, answered the cowman. They're cats, and I'm fixing to return them to their maker. One ugly old meow around the chuck wagon is bother enough. Are you the chef? No, sir, I'm the cook. Over with the Lazy Q outfit. We're holding our bevies until we can get $25 a head. You a cattle buyer? No, sir. I merely stopped to see if you'd let me have a look at those cats. I'd like to know what time it is so I can set my clock. What time is it? The cook's eyes narrowed. What in blazes is a cat? Or what time it is? The cook's eyes narrowed. What in blazes has a cat got to do with setting your clock? Why, cats keep splendid time, sir, said Uncle Will, stepping down from the wagon. He opened the sack and pulled up a tiger kitten that barely filled his hand. He studied it a minute. It appears to be 18 minutes to 11, exactly. The cook's weathered face wrinkled up at the eyes. Stranger, you mean to stand there and tell me you can look at a cat and read the time? Certainly, sir, said Uncle Will. He opened his carpet bag, found the last of his clocks, and set the hands at 18 minutes to 11. Well, that beats all, said the cook. How do you do that? Experience, said Uncle Will, hooking a thumb in his vest pocket. Practice and more practice. It's all in the darks of the eyes, the way they widen and shrink with the daylight. If you study a kitten's eyes long enough, you get so you can just about hit the time on the head. I'm never more than a minute or two off. Fry me brown, said the cook. Could I do that? I wouldn't be surprised. Practice, you say? And more practice. I believe I might hold out one of these meows. Won't the boys jump out of their boots when they see me tell time? It's none of my business, said Uncle Will, but I'd advise you to hang on to the whole litter. I've known cats to run slow and run fast. After you get the hang of it, you'll know which one makes the best timepiece. Why, I'm obliged to you, hoss. Just study the darks of the eyes, do you? Uncle Will nodded. At first, you'll need to check cat time against your timepiece. Well, you're learning, I mean. You do own a watch, don't you? The cook gave out a great sigh. Drat it, until this minute, the only time I reckoned was daytime and nighttime, and I never needed a watch for that. What do you take for that clock? Oh, I couldn't let that go. It's the only one I got. Well, see here, hoss. I'll give you one of these cats, and you won't need your clock. Take your pick, and I'll pay you what the clock's worth, as long as it ain't over $10. Uncle Will thought it over. I sorely hate to part with that clock, but I reckon you need it more than I do. $10 will do fine. Indiana, which one of them kittens takes your eye? She leaped joyously from the wagon and went through the sack. In no time, the bargain was completed. Uncle Will gave the reins a snap. The camp cook went happily on his way with the lumpy muling sack and the last of Uncle Will's timepieces. Reckon that puts me out of the clock business, said Will Buckthorn. Can you really tell time from a cat's eyes? Indiana asked. I don't know, he answered. I never tried it before. And on they rode towards Sundance. And that's the end of chapter 15.